Welcome to Trades Tuesday. We're here in the Anthony Hay Cabinet Shop with myself. I'm Melanie Belanger, apprentice harpsichord maker, and this is Ed Wright, our journeyman harpsichord maker. And we look forward to talking with you a little bit about the instruments that we're building here.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to our corner, which is actually in the Anthony Hay Cabinet Shop. I'm Ed Wright, as you saw in the intro. I've been journeyman harpsichord maker here. I came here in 1983, and I've been working with harpsichord since the late 1980s, first as an apprentice here, and then under my master, Marcus Hansen. And then since 2008, I've been in charge of the corner. And then Melanie's been with me for going on 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I come with a background of about 25 years or so of making violin family instruments, and I'm really happy to have gone over to the dark side. So we'll be happy to take your questions and comments as we go for the next little bit.
But first, we would like to introduce this piece. This is our newest spinet that I introduced to you musically. And this is actually based on an instrument in Colonial Williamsburg's collection, which was made in 1726 by Cotton Aston. And I believe we have a photograph of that particular instrument. So this was not an absolute reproduction. You might notice a little bit more decoration work on the face of the original. But I was interested in the instrument particularly from its technical point of view, and so I made this one to focus on that without the decoration kind of being, kind of diverging my mind a bit here. I should mention, in addition to making these instruments here at Colonial Williamsburg, that we are on actually pretty solid historical ground. As I mentioned, we are in the corner of the cabinet shop here, and this is a place where we know this work was offered. In 1767, a man named Benjamin Bucktrout, who was an immigrant from England, came and took over this particular cabinet shop here on this site from its former master, Anthony Hay. And I believe we have a picture of the ad that Bucktrout placed in 1767, and in addition to offering fine furniture, he offered, at the bottom of the ad, spinets and harpsichords made and repaired. Adding to that, just a few years ago, we found references to him doing repair work, making replacement mechanical parts for a spinet, helping with the unpacking and the setting up of a combination organ and piano. And yes, that combination in a single instrument occurred more frequently than you might imagine. So that's our history, and for us, I and Melanie being here and actually located within the cabinet shop. Now, let's talk about this instrument. So why don't we start by taking it down and showing some of the parts.
Sure.
So you get that end.
Get the jack rail back here.
Get the jack rail off.
So.
That goes in the face, and this might be a bit more dramatic.
And the name board.
Name board comes off. This is done so that way the instrument can be maintained with some great ease. And then now we need to fish out a couple of the jacks.
Right.
I'm going to take those.
Sure.
Okay. And this one.
Mm-hmm.
And now we'll take out a couple of the keys. One of the black keys or accidental keys, and then we will take out one of the naturals.
Sure. This might be a good time too to see if we've had any questions come in just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this, and certainly people ask all the time, but Louise was curious, what's the difference between a harpsichord and a piano? And as you're looking at that, it's probably a good time to address that.
Well, you heard a little bit of Ed's playing just as we were coming in there, and that probably gave you a pretty good indication that this isn't the piano that you're probably used to. So with a piano, there's a felted hammer that strikes the string. It's really more of a percussion instrument when you think about it that way. So you probably saw the keys that Ed has pulled out here too. And they're a little more than just the face that you see at the very front of the keyboard there. So with the whole key lever, having a balance pin there, acting more like a seesaw, a teeter-totter when you press the key in down, it's going to pop one of these jacks up here in the back on a harpsichord here and actually pluck the string. I think we've got a short little clip that we can show you of those jacks in motion, and actually in slow motion, just so you can get a little idea of what's happening here.
And what you'll see will be, there's a small pick, a black pick, a quill, literally cut from a crow feather,
This guy
just
here.
underneath, sitting at rest underneath the string, and it bobs up, plucks the string, and built into that jack is a little pivot action, so that when you let the key go, it falls by gravity, and the quill can fall, touch the string, slip back and underneath. So it'll pluck up, fall, and pivot under. It'll pluck up, fall, and pivot under. It's extremely fast. And a lot of the setup for that involves, for making one of these jacks that we have here on the workbench, probably involves about, I want to say about 20 individual steps just to make one of these, so that way they work well and neatly.
And just for point of reference too, on these little spins we're making, it's about a 5-octave compass, so 61 of these keys. So on some of those bigger double manual harpsichords like you might have seen, there could be easily a couple of hundred of these jacks. Interesting to note too, during the period there were actually folks who just made these jack blanks, jack makers.
Yeah.
So
We
it's kind
actually,
of cool.
we actually have a will by one man in London who identified himself in the will. He titled himself Harpsichord Maker, but in the will he left all of his tools to the son of his serving woman, so that way he would be able to continue in the business of jack making, quote unquote. So we do know that in a bigger city like London, especially some of the larger firms like run by Jacob Kirkman or Burkut Schutte, not everything was all done under one roof. There was jobbing out. Even acquiring materials and parts played a huge role in making this kind of work, making this work kind of operate, and as a business. And bottom line was that it was going to be a business. But the work would have to be done very repetitiously, as Melanie was saying. You've got 61 keys, you've got 61 jacks, 61 strings, all the pins thereof. Not only are there pins for holding the key for just the motion, but there are also pins in the very back that also keep the keys from wanting to move sideways, because you don't want that lateral motion. Then the keys are just going to rub against each other, and obviously that's not going to work. So there's an awful lot of drill work, there's an awful lot of planning, and with an instrument like a spinet, which is, there's nothing square on this thing, it can be really challenging not only to lay it out theoretically, but also as soon as you pick up tools and start executing things, small adjustments have to be made. Not too bad, but you have to be prepared for that.
A lot of finesse.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
We have a question from Doug, who was wondering about the quills that pluck the string. How long would they last? How often would they have to be replaced? And then maybe you can also speak to who might do that work.
Sure.
Yeah, the feathers. These are usually from the flight feathers of the crow. And most of the picks, the plectra, to be formal terminology, thank you, come mostly from the black area of the feather.
Sort of the center seam.
Center sections,
Right.
yeah, thank you. And then the end of the feather is actually cut like the end of a quill pen, and then just simply fitted into a mortise, nipped off, and then the actual quill in the jack can then be trimmed so that it behaves properly. They last actually for thousands of plucks. You only really replace them when you notice that the plucking seems to be weak, and a good player can even feel it in the touch.
There's a lot of things we can do with how we carve those little picks too. The angle that they sit even in the jack, all these things are going to affect how it feels for the player and how it ultimately sounds to the listener too. You do see other materials sometimes other than crow, occasionally things like more modern times, since crow is getting a little harder to come by. Seagull, we've seen people try turkey. Goose.
I used turkey for a while. Has to be wild turkey. Domestic turkeys, no, too wimpy.
Ask us how we know these things.
So
it's a lot of experimenting, and really sometimes our job kind of deviates into forensic analysis in kind of a cool sort of way.
Some of these are mentioned in documents, but you can't always take the documents completely at face value. Descriptions of the instrument, the use of materials. So part of our job is to wade through some of that information. And most old harpsichords are not going to have such items that are easily replaced or even lost over the course of time. They won't be surviving on the instrument. So that it takes the experimentation and testing to see what seems to work.
Should probably mention too that in a modern sense, sometimes for us we have to also consider ways that we can be sort of sustainable, and so as those feathers become harder to come by, there are modern synthetic materials like Delrin that can be used. They feel different, they sound different. It's not going to give the same 100% effect that the feather does, but it's a good alternative to have. Yeah.
One other aspect about the quills is that with each jack, the quills will have to be trimmed with a penknife and then tested in the instrument, because the goal is to have all of the notes being plucked with the same intensity, none that are being overplucked or being underplucked. Right. Unlike a piano where the hammer is actually tied to the travel of the key and it hits the strings harder, softer, you get louder, softer. Here, it's just one dynamic level. There's some room to adjust, but the goal is that all of the notes have the same intensity, and hopefully at the same time, the touch of the keys is consistent. You don't want some keys feeling stiffer or feeling lighter under the fingers. Players do not like that kind of inconsistency. So it's a tall order to bring all of that together. But that's the goal for our job as builders, and that's the goals that good players are going to be expecting from us.
So speaking of materials and sustainability and animals and under the fingers, can you talk about the keyboard and what that's made of?
Sure.
Sure.
Address the elephant in the room, if you will.
Very good. The keyboards actually are made of wood, usually a lightweight wood. This is white pine, eastern white pine, but spruces or lindens would be used. And literally it begins as a keyboard and then covered with the white and black materials. And this might seem a little unusual because we always have had we've always had the talk of saying that the keyboards on these instruments are made of ivory and ebony, and that's never ever literally been true in the sense of the entire key lever made of those materials. Number one, they're expensive. Number two, they're incredibly dense and they're difficult to work. So you go the other direction, you make the keys out of a lightweight material, and then as we have here on the samples that we pulled from the spinet, you can see that the white and the black are merely coverings, thin sheets, in this case, of bone, beef bone, and then ordinarily a black ebony or maybe a wood that's been stained black. And in this instance, as we took from the Cotton Aston instrument, there was a popular trend in the 1720s, 30s, and 40s of sandwiching the white and the black together to create this sort of skunk tail look. The skunk tail is a modern term. I'd really like to know what they called this effect in the 18th century. It might have been the same thing, I don't know, but that's what's kind of caught on in the modern lingo. So bone pieces that we have here, some of them we're actually making into new decorations for our next spinet. These little half-moon molded arcades. These will actually take the position here on the front of the key instead of this molding that we used here on this one, and we'll add a beautiful decorative touch.
And you mentioned bone, and part of why we can reliably and assuredly use that, we know it was used during the period as well.
Right.
It wasn't always ivory. Ivory and ebony both are materials that would be coming in, really as part of that transatlantic slave trade, and wouldn't always necessarily be available. And they're going to come at a cost when you can get them. So things like bone or even other woods that could be stained to either look and have a lighter sort of effect, or woods that could be stained to look like ebony and have that dark effect, could be used as well.
You'd find walnut even used as an ebony substitute, and with a couple of coats of oil it could be darkened up and make a wonderful contrast with the bone. We do know that ebony and ivory as materials were available in Colonial Virginia. There was one man in Norfolk who actually offered ivory remnants from his work in manufacturing billiard balls. And so the scrap material was also available for other uses, buttons, knife handles. The ebony even came into some of that work as well. So seemingly exotic, but our trade was really well developed in order to get those kinds of materials here. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions about the sale of these instruments. Both Barbara and Angie were curious. How many people were ordering instruments like this? Was there a constant need for it? Were they only made on commission, or were they also made on speculation? And I imagine it's different in the colonies versus in England and so forth.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good clarification to make. Remarkably, many of these instruments were imported and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to England, which seems amazing. They probably showed up in a shop like ours here in the colony after they got off the boat, because they probably needed help just to get them back into condition. In that context, the instrument was ordered. And of course, here, the person is ordering blind from England, and hopefully they get what they're looking for. Sometimes people here knew about builders in England who had a pretty good reputation, and so they might even specify, yeah, I'd like to have this instrument from this particular builder.
Yeah, you might even have like your agent or representative who knows your tastes go and either try the instruments out or give them your specific requirements.
Yeah. There's a wonderful situation with George Washington when he ordered a spinet for his stepdaughter, Patsy Custis. He wrote to his factor, the Careys, his agent in England, and mentioned the spinet. And he said, please search out the spinet as if you are buying it for yourself, Mr. Carey. Do not tell anybody that it's going to Virginia. George Washington had already had problems getting second-rate goods for first-rate prices. So in this particular instance, he wanted to make certain that somebody didn't take advantage of the fact that this thing was going to be coming 3,000 miles across an ocean, and it would be very difficult to fix the situation if a problem had arisen, or if it was not right. You read some of Washington's letters, and this is a kind of a running issue with him. It really was.
So you could see them made to order, custom ordered like that. You also saw folks who were buying them secondhand, either from estate sales or from shops like the Prentice store here in town. And I want to talk about some price markups. There was
Yeah.
at least one example that. Do we have the image for that?
No, I don't think we do. But one of our merchants here, John Prentice, offered what he described as an elegant, genteel spinet, mentions that it had mahogany coming from the Caribbean in its casing, and he offers the price of £22, which most spinets that were sold in England at the same period of time, and staying in England, £6, maybe £7. So yes, we could kind of understand a markup like that when you include transport across the ocean. And of course, a merchant here is going to mark the price up even further because he wants to get his profit off of this. But 22
It's
pounds.
pretty extreme. Yeah.
Either this is one heck of a spinet, or there's aspects of the way Mr. Prentice does business and pricing that we don't completely understand.
We also don't know if it actually sold, though, too.
That's true,
So
we don't.
maybe nobody took him up on it.
No.
But it tended to be folks of more middling, upper middling gentry sort of classes who would be buying these in the first place.
And in larger cities, it was possible to visit the shop, visit a builder, and they might actually have a couple of instruments just available for you to choose from and get that instrument. One of the very first references we have to spinets in England is from the 1660s, when Samuel Pepys notes in his diary that he visited a harpsichord maker, found a small spinet that he really liked. Took him a while to decide actually to buy it. Ultimately he did, and it was delivered to his house 2 days later, along with a tech to show him how to tune and how to take care of it. So that way he wouldn't be completely left in the lurch. So we take care of you, okay? You buy one of our instruments, we take care of you.
And so they buy one of your instruments or some from wherever. Again, Melanie, you just mentioned relatively well-to-do people, maybe upper middle class folks. Once people get these instruments, how are they really using them? Nathan asks, what was music education like in colonial America? Today, of course, we see harpsichords in churches or in public performance spaces, but how would they have been used, within the culture of the 18th century?
Sure.
Let's see. Mostly in the homes. It is often associated, especially with the tutoring and the education of young ladies. Although obviously men played the keyboard instruments, professional musicians, and of course the famous ones that we know of, like Sebastian Bach, George Frederick Handel, Domenico Scarlatti, who was the composer of the little piece that I was kind of fumbling through at the beginning here, known to be extraordinary players and users. Playing an instrument in the 18th century was a social grace, and yes, we are talking, as Melanie mentioned, these are the white, middling, and aristocratic levels of the society, and most people were expected to be a little bit musical. So playing on an instrument, and of course, in the refinest of social circles, there were instruments that were appropriate for women, keyboards, particularly some for men, particularly violin. Thomas Jefferson was a violin player. His wife, Martha, was a very, very good keyboardist, and they used to play duets for friends and just for their own entertainment. There were teachers. Some would come over from England and advertised in the Gazette that they were available. We actually did have one man from England. His name was Cuthbert Ogle. He had had quite a reputation in England, came over to Williamsburg. He advertised that he could fix instruments, but that he also gave lessons in deportment and in music. And unfortunately, it did not last long, because 2 months later, he died of fever, which was so frequently the case with immigrants who were coming from England and then coming to this, practically by comparison, tropical environment to Virginia. And so that's a pretty tragic case. But we also have many who came over, like our church organist, Peter Pelham, trained in Boston, came, worked here, he taught, worked with the church. So there the means of being able to get educated, and of course families like the Carters and the Lees, they hire tutors, and many times, and if the tutor doesn't know about music, then they had the means of being able to seek out a teacher for their kids and for themselves too.
I have a question from William about clavichords, if you made them, if people played them. And maybe this is also a good time to discuss just the whole world of names for keyboard instruments and all the different types of keyboard instruments that show up in 18th century life and in records.
Sure.
Yeah, and the nomenclature is not tight at that time. So it's confusing, even for us who have dealt with this for a long stretch of time. Okay, to clarify, as you saw in the little slow motion video, when you're dealing with the harpsichord, the little pick rises and fully plucks the string. A clavichord, and I don't have an image of this, the clavichord, when you press the key, raises a little blade, a tangent, which comes and touches the string. One part of the string at one end has been muted, and then from that little tangent to the other end is able to vibrate. So what that tangent does is that it not only sets the string in motion, but it also establishes how long the vibrating length of that string will be. It's an incredibly quiet instrument. If you hear recordings of clavichords today, you know, in the mastering they can, and of course even on your own systems, you can adjust the volumes. Many people, if they've heard that and then they come into the presence of a real clavichord, it's usually a pretty big letdown because it's not powerful. It's very, very intimate. They were wonderful for practicing, especially if you lived in the cities, in these tenements, and you're a musician and you need to practice. These clavichords with their very, very soft touch sound were very convenient. You don't annoy your neighbors with all your practicing with those. It just so happens, though, that the English were not much into clavichords, but they were on the continent and in the German lands. Johann Sebastian Bach certainly had them, and especially in Pennsylvania, which had such a strong German settling of the population there. And in fact, a wonderful builder by the name of David Tannenberg, trained in Europe, became a Moravian, came to, actually he trained in Europe as a cabinet maker, came to Pennsylvania. His cabinet making skills won him a job working for an organ maker named Johann Klemm, and Tannenberg went on to become a major organ maker in the late 18th and very early 19th century. But he also made one, possibly two clavichords that still survive. And a colleague of ours is researching some surviving spinets that might possibly be by him too. Still working on that. But clavichords are mostly mentioned here in the colonies and really in the areas which had more of a German settling pattern.
So
I don't know of one here in this part of Virginia at all.
I can't think of one either, but since we're kind of taking most of our cues from England, we tend to see more of these spinets, harpsichords, and we're starting to see pianos showing up here too, because they were invented around 1700, and so they're starting to become a thing that we see and have evidence of here in Williamsburg too.
One of the first mentions we have for a piano here in Williamsburg is in, I want to say 1770, 1771, when it was performed on over at the Raleigh Tavern.
Time for one last question today. Are there, I often like to find out from our various craftspeople if there are things that you've made that you're particularly proud of, or like to share something with us, or even a part of a project that is something that resonated with you.
Ladies first.
Thank you. No pressure, right?
No pressure.
I think probably the things I've been most proud of have been restoration work that I've done for musicians over the years, because being able to take something that's broken or sounding bad or just making you hurt to play on, and taking that and putting it back in good working order for a musician and having them breathe that sigh of relief that they have their baby back, is probably the most rewarding thing and the thing that always keeps me going through all of this. We're really making tools for musicians. But probably the most exciting and fun thing that I'm doing right now is, I don't know if you guys can see it at all, but on the bench here beside me, the veneer decoration for the next instrument we're working on.
Yeah.
I can hold this thing up?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll take one in.
We'll just go vertical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this guy here. So that's the back spine for the next harpsichord.
It'll be this part.
So going that
Actually.
way there. But
If you notice also, she's only decorated the upper edge of it, because that's the only part back here that you're going to see.
yeah.
Put the effort where it counts.
How about you, Ed?
And for me,
Yeah.
I would actually say this keyboard is probably one that I am most proud of, and it's simply because after what seems like, endless tests and variations in approach, it really has turned out to be the best mechanically operating one that I've turned out. And that, coupled with refinements on the plucking action, it really has turned out to be, I think, quite successful. Before COVID became part of our lives and we had visitors in the shop, we would even let some visitors who had obviously demonstrated on our shop instrument that they had some pretty serious playing skills. We'd let them try this one out, and all of the comments were favorable. And so for me, this kind of represents the new standard in keyboard work for the corner.
Mm.
So I'm really, really proud.
And the
of this
culmination of a lot of research you've done.
one.
Really.
Melanie and Edward, thank you both so much
yeah.
for welcoming everyone into your shop today. Thank you everyone at home for all the wonderful questions and comments. Of course, all of our programs are made possible by the generosity of our donors. To learn how you can support programs like this, follow the link pinned in the comments below or visit us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Melanie and Ed, do you have any final thoughts or tones to share with us?
Just wanted to say thank you guys for joining us today, and I hope you'll come see us sometime.
Please come and see us. Yeah. At this stage right now, the cabinet shop offers demonstrations not in the shop, but over at the new art museum, which has gone through such a true large expansion, and they're moving new pieces in.
It's beautiful.
So it's really, really wonderful. And the cabinet shop is there Wednesdays and Saturdays, and it will include our colleagues, the cabinet makers, and then also will include Melanie and I, and we bring part of our trade there to show to you all. So please come.
And if you watch our events calendar too, Ed and I, along with Daniel Corneliuson, one of our musicians here, have been doing programs at the Hennage Auditorium too, kind of alternating Thursdays. So if you're interested and in town, keep an eye out for that.
And we appreciate you taking some time out to come and visit us in our corner. We really do.
You want to play us out?
Yeah, I will. Okay,
Okay.
we're back together. And let's see. Louis